Hey guys, welcome back. Today we have a response video. This video is about whether it's possible to have too much self-awareness. A psychiatrist reacts to whether it's possible to have too much self-awareness. I think this dovetails with what we've been talking about recently. Not that we've been talking about self-awareness, but when we talk about ego, when we talk about humility, right? Do you destroy your ego? Well, it depends what you mean by ego. There's a healthy ego and then there's an unhealthy ego. So the question of do I destroy my ego really falls back on the question, what even is an ego? How do you have a healthy ego, right? There's a nuanced definition, distinction. This is concept formation. And the problem is when you conflate a healthy ego with an unhealthy ego, then the question of what do you do with your ego? It doesn't make any sense. Same thing with humility. Do you be humble? Well, depends what you mean by humble. There's a healthy humility, unhealthy humility. These are not questions specifically about psychology, more about philosophy, more about concept formation, integration, definitions. This is Socrates kind of stuff. And I think that's what we're going to discuss here, or see what this guy says in this video on self-awareness. What do you mean by self-awareness? Is it possible to have too much self-awareness? It depends on your definition. But if we don't flesh out the definition for self-awareness and how there could be different kinds of self-awareness, then we're never going to get to the answer. Even worse, if we turn to science for the answer, it's going to be even more confusing. So let's see what this guy has to say. And this is from the channel Healthy Gamer GG. I'll link it in the description.
I almost posted in response to this. Okay, so this person is actually brilliant because it is actually, there's good scientific evidence that this is part of the problem. So every mental health professional I've ever talked to has been like, you have a lot of self-awareness, man. And I'm like, yes, I actually think that is part of the problem. Absolutely true.
Yeah, by the way, he already says there's good scientific evidence that having too much self-awareness leads to some kind of neurosis. That's the implication. That's what the science says. What exactly does science say, though? Just keep that question in mind as you watch this.
So this is, can I just Harvard Andy here for a second?
Yeah, that's the point.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So we have this part of our brain called the default mode network. Okay. And the default mode network is the part of our brain that gives us the capacity for self-awareness. So if we look at like animals and humans, the biggest...
That's true. It gives us the capacity for self-awareness. That's true. I think there's going to be a conflation here already. I forget. I already watched this, but we'll see.
Difference between animals and humans, most animals and humans anyway, is the default mode network. So like animals, like let's say like you take a deer or something, like a deer will go about its day and then it won't think about itself going about its day. But human beings have this capacity of self-reflection. And so that capacity for self-reflection is this thing called the default mode network. So what I can do is, look at the actions that I take and kind of reflect on my sense of self within these actions. Let me just think about how to explain that better.
Please do. Thank you.
If I ask, like, if a deer looks around for food in 10 places and doesn't find food, the deer doesn't start to feel like an idiot because it hasn't been able to find food and it's like 0 for 10. But if we think about human beings, if I, ask 10 girls out and then they say no, like as a human being, I start to think about myself in that way. And then I say, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. So human beings have this, and if you really think about it,
you see what he does there? This isn't even the fundamental error necessarily, but you see what he does there. Because we have this default mode network, and we do, it's not an area of the brain. It's just several different areas of the brain that kind of work together. It's essentially what a network is. I forget exactly what areas. You can go look it up. Because we have this network in our brain, when we ask out 10 girls and they all say no, as a human, simply as a human, I start to doubt myself. Is that really what happens? Just because this thing fires, well, we'll get to it. I don't want to get too far into myself.
It's actually like quite profound, and it's an amazing capability that our brain has where we can do like meta level thinking about ourselves as we move about in the world. That is done by the default mode network. So it's essentially our capacity for self-awareness. Now, the interesting thing is that once we have the default mode network, we also, evolutionarily speaking, buy ourselves the possibility of depression. And
because we have the capacity for self-reflection, we have the capacity for depression. I mean, that's kind of true. But what else do you have the capacity for? For change and growth and improvement and evolution in your life psychologically. You also have the capacity for that. Why are you just focusing on, well, this thing gives us the capacity for depression? We're more likely to be depressed. I mean, a lot of this argument can be found in the book Why Zebras Get Ulcers, which I definitely recommend you read. It's a great introduction, especially if you're really not into psychology. You know, if you're one of the lay people who don't know that much about psychology, it's a good introduction. Why don't zebras get ulcers? Because they can't think about their lives, right? They can't self-reflect. But I really think the title of the book should be, Why Don't Zebras Do Anything Besides Run Away from Lions? Because they don't have the capacity for self-reflect. You can think about it both ways. All right.
What we find is that people who are depressed have overly active default mode networks. Okay? So let's think about this for...
That's true. That's true. People who are depressed have an overly active default mode network. Does that just mean because your default mode network is overly active, does that mean that you are depressed? No, that's one instance. That's one brain state correlated with depression. We also need the default mode network for, I don't know too much about it, for reflection, for understanding stories, for understanding our life as a story. We use it for lots of things. Just because we use it or it's overactive when we're depressed doesn't mean just because we have it, it makes us depressed. Right? I mean, what's a good analogy? Okay, you have a hand. Just because you can use it to make a fist in somebody, does that mean having a hand makes you use the fist to punch somebody? Or, even better example, right? If you have a car with a fast acceleration, like a Countach, hope it's a Countach, and you wrap it around a tree, when the cops come and you say, look, my car has fast acceleration, that's why I wrapped it around a tree. Not because I was, drinking 3.5 tall boys and playing Kickstart My Heart over and over again. What causes you to wrap the brain, to wrap the car, to wrap the Countach around the tree? What really causes the depression? I mean, this is what psychology does, and it's really frustrating in its attempt. This is just one instance. I know I've talked about this a lot. Here's one great instance. Psychology's attempt to be a science, to be a hard science, which it definitely is not right now. It may be one day, and then my job will be useless. That's great. I'm totally fine with that. But it is not a hard science, but we're trying to make it into a hard science. So we end up making ridiculous statements. I'm sure this guy's much more intelligent than I am, but we end up making ridiculous statements like, oh, just because this area, not even an area, a network in the brain, which it comprises several areas, just because this network is firing when we're depressed, that means we are going to be depressed simply because we have this network in our brain. All right. Continuing.
A second, okay? So I asked 2 girls out. Default mode network is not active. It's just, they said no. Okay, both of them said they had boyfriends. No big deal. I'm not thinking about myself in that way. I asked 10 girls out. They all say no. Now this default mode network activates and it's like, hey man, maybe you're ugly or something like that, right? It starts thinking negative thoughts about you, and it's sort of this meta level problem solving.
Is that what happens? That's not even what happens. So you have it somewhere in your default mode network that if 2 girls say no, it's fine, but if 10 girls say no, then it's not fine. Is that how it works? I know he's trying to give an example, but the example is inaccurate because it takes out certain psychological functions, namely consciousness. And that's what happens when you try to reduce psychology to a hard science right now, given our level of technology. fMRI machines, which are great. They can be useful, but there's huge problems there measuring brain activity. Are you even measuring what you're measuring? Right? You can look at somebody who's depressed, look at their default mode network. I'm sure that's what this study, I mean, I haven't read it, but I'm sure you can show that. That is a correlation scientifically. Does that mean that just having this network in your brain causes depression? Okay.
thing where it's like looking at you as a person and saying, can we change something about ourselves to increase our overall chances of success? Okay. So
right, that's good.
That's what the default mode network does. Now, when someone gets depressed, their default mode network is highly active. Okay. And then what happens is when I ask 2 girls out, but my default mode network is highly active from depression, then I start thinking those meta thoughts about how I'm the problem in this big situation, except now the situation is tiny.
Sorry.
And when the default mode network is hyperactive, even tiny little things that really shouldn't be my fault become like my fault because this circuit in my brain that's like being self-reflective is always on. So then you get to these weird thoughts that depressed people have, like, oh, my family would be better off without me. And it's just like such a weird thought. But what you really see is that this is a situation where, you know, their mind is viewing like a meta problem with themselves in things that are completely unrelated. Oh, like these people are going to fire me because I'm a waste of space. And like all the time you're thinking about yourself, thinking about yourself, thinking about yourself, which is literally your capacity for self-reflection, exactly like this guy is saying.
Thinking about yourself necessarily leads to these negative thoughts. Well, by the way, guys who have been tuned in to this channel for at least a little bit, what is he talking about? What do you think he's talking about? Oh, nobody likes me. Yeah, it's depression. What else does that sound like? That sounds like some other kind of emotion that we talk about quite often. Is that the conflation he's making? We will get to it.
Okay. So it's like what he's saying. He's like, yes, your self-awareness is part of the problem. Your mind's being stuck at always looking at yourself instead of taking a step back is actually correlated neuroscientifically with depression. So this person is 100% correct. So other evidence.
Correlated neuroscientifically with depression. I mean, he's not saying anything wrong. Yeah, but this is what propaganda is, right? It's just a part of the truth. You say, look, I'm right. What, you don't believe in science? It's only part of what's going on. There's this whole philosophical discussion of what are you even talking about that you're not getting to. So this ends up being propaganda. Propaganda that says just because you have this part of your brain that we can see lights up, fires, activates when you're depressed, that means you automatically get depressed. Okay.
Kind of weird, right? So now we have these things like novel treatments for depression, like ketamine. So ketamine is an example of, don't recommend you use ketamine, is a substance of abuse that can also be used in a licensed and prescribed way to treat depression. And what ketamine is it's like a...
Okay, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but it's just, this bothers me. It didn't bother me so much my first time watching this. Now it just jumps out and it really grinds my gears, guys. Ketamine is not a treatment for depression. Please stop saying that. And what he's going to talk about here is he's essentially going to admit as much. It's not a treatment for depression. What does it do? It treats the symptoms of depression. I guess this is a secondary issue here. It's not really what I'm talking about in this response video. But we got to say this right. Oh, what's the big deal, Mar? Whether it's a treatment for the symptoms. He knows what he's talking about. Does he? Does he? Because right now he's correlating just the fact that we have this network in our brain. We are likely to get depressed. We're just automatically going to get depressed. It's what happens when you ask out 10 girls and they all say no. Right? So we really got to be clear. We really got to be crystal clear when we talk about these issues. Does ketamine treat depression? It definitely does not. It treats the symptoms of depression, which I'm not saying don't use ketamine. It sounds like a good time. I've never done it. But be clear about what you're doing. You're not treating depression. The symptoms, big difference. When you take acetaminophen, does it treat the cold? No, it just makes you more okay to go. Like you can get through a freaking 45-minute Zoom meeting now. What would you take your acetaminophen where before you couldn't? Right, it just manages the symptoms. So at least you don't totally crash and burn today. Ketamine manages the symptoms of depression so you don't kill yourself this week. All right.
Dissociative agent, right? So what it does is it causes you to like separate from yourself. And so what ketamine does, so ketamine is one of the quickest acting treatments for depression. So if someone is in a depressive episode and they get administered ketamine, they can improve within like hours. Whereas most things like SSRIs or antidepressant medication will take weeks, right? So I really do not recommend that people use ketamine.
Or instead of taking an SSRI, just clean up your diet, eat healthy fats, go get some sunshine. Right? Serotonin is all, or depression is all about serotonin, and serotonin is produced in your gut. So okay, this is a side issue. I am ranting.
I mean, recreationally, because when you use it as a treatment.
What I'm saying there, if you're new to the channel, what I'm saying there is people always say, oh, just improve your gut health and that will cure depression. Does it? Is that how depression even works? Is that even how SSRIs work? Do you even know exactly how an SSRI works? Is it because it gives you, just for lack of, just to make this as simple as possible, more serotonin in your brain? Or does it change the ability of your brain to use serotonin, right? Big difference. Just giving your brain more serotonin in your body doesn't necessarily mean you're not depressed anymore. It's one aspect. By the way, serotonin is one transmitter or that affects depression. So just saying, oh, have healthy fats, have better gut health, get your nutritional yeast, and you're going to cure depression. And I'm not saying not to do that. I think gut health is really important, but let's keep it in its proper lane. Okay.
There's a purity guarantee. There's also an administration issue because it is a drug of abuse. It's administered with like a nurse nearby because of the dangerous side effects. So don't recreationally use ketamine. Or don't even get it prescribed, use it under the guidance of a
unless
physician.
You want to have a good time.
But the key thing here is the neuroscience of it, okay? So what does ketamine do in the brain? So what it does is shut off the default mode network. So in that dissociation where I stop getting stuck in myself,
it shuts off the default mode network, and you're not going to be depressed when you're on ketamine, but also you're not going to do much with your life. You turn yourself into a zebra.
Actually shuts off the default mode network. And so some of these other substances, which are there are trials now for things like psilocybin and MDMA and stuff, all of those hallucinogen substances that cause people to have this cosmic sense of connection, it separates you from this kind of thinking.
Well, that's what's interesting about psilocybin is I don't really know how ketamine works, but psilocybin makes you more self-aware. It just gives you a different perspective on your life. It does also influence serotonin levels, right? I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but it makes you more self-aware. It is, in a sense, a waking dream. But even though people have these waking dreams, they can become less self-aware in the way that this guy talks about. I'm not saying people can't have bad experiences from psilocybin. It happens all the time. But I don't think that's necessarily a reason not to do it. I think that's probably a reason to do it. That's going to give you a bad experience. I mean, you're not going to die. You may have some panic episode, but that's good. Why are you having that? It's going to make you aware. Did the psilocybin cause that, or did it just make you aware of issues that are already there? Right.
Which is
not a pro-drug channel, by the way. I just want to be clear. These things can be useful, but it's useful in a completely different way than ketamine is. Anyway.
Instead of your high self-awareness being focused on you all the time, now suddenly, with these substances, your mind is able to pull back from that, and you actually shut off the default mode network. Okay? So this is actually brilliant. It's a wonderful observation. Okay. So, the brain's default mode network. People sometimes want references, right? So here's a good, I guess this is written by
okay. I have
Marcus
Google.
E. Rachley. Okay.
2 hours later.
So does that make sense, chat? I don't know if you're failing this class for sure.
All right, the punchline's coming here soon. I swear.
I'm lost.
Okay. So basically, this is what the paper says. We normally have an intact sense of self, okay? This intact sense of self and our high awareness of ourselves, we're always looking at ourselves. Like an active default mode network means that when I'm at a party, instead of paying attention to other people, my mind is constantly occupied by thinking about myself. Oh, I look stupid. I sound stupid. People aren't talking to me.
Yes, and your default mode network is activated when that's happening. It's also activated if you're watching a story, a movie, I guess we call them now. If you're watching a movie and you see yourself in the hero, your default mode network is activated then. And you're learning about your life by learning about what this hero struggles with and what he needs to go through. Two seemingly different emotional states, right? Anyway.
People are talking to other. The focus of your mind is on I. You are the object of your attention. Okay? Like anxiety, yes.
Like anxiety. Yes. Oh, wow. So what are we even talking about here? Are we talking about self-awareness, or are we talking about self-consciousness? Are we talking about anxiety? These two completely different functions. Awareness, I mean, you need awareness to change and grow. Awareness is in a sense saying, how am I interacting with the environment? How is the environment, in a sense, the reflection of my psychology? That's what self-awareness is. And you're conflating that pinnacle, perhaps, of human achievement that takes courage and real guts to do sometimes. I mean, everybody can do it 90%. It's really easy to be 90% self-aware. But that last 10% where you really got to own crap and really got to face down issues, that's difficult stuff to do. Resistance comes up. Oh, it just becomes really difficult. And, oh, yeah, but my mom, my dad did this to me, right? You are conflating that pinnacle of psychological growth, that what we need for psychological growth, right? It's not why don't zebras get ulcers? Like, why don't zebras do anything? Right? Why don't they grow and evolve? Well, I mean, they do in some degree, but why are they not humans? You're equating that with anxiety. You're equating that with a guy being anxious, being in the corner of a party, like that meme now, talking about how he used to be a Dogecoin, whatever, millionaire once. You're equating self-awareness with anxiety. Guys, you can look at fMRI studies all day long and get really knowledgeable about different networks. I'm sure this guy knows more about the default mode network than I do, if there's a quiz. But I definitely know enough about it. I know enough to indicate that he doesn't understand the conceptual foundation of psychology. Got to get these definitions right. When we talk about humility, we got to be clear about what we mean. When we talk about ego, we got to be clear about what we mean. And when we talk about self-awareness, we got to be clear about what we mean. And not just say, oh, because you have this network in your brain, it's going to make you more self-aware, really more anxious. Because I haven't done the philosophical heavy lifting. I know philosophy is a waste of time. Haha, do you want fries with that? But we need it here. We need it here to clear up these important concepts in psychology so we can look at fMRI studies and interpret them in a healthy, not just a healthy way, but a reality-oriented way. And then maybe psychology will be a science, a hard science one day, but not without being a definitive philosophy. That's what we can help you with here. That's what we can work on here. AnimusEmpire.com/schedule. We do free consultations. We will show you how to how to talk about anxiety to become more self-aware. Not more anxious like he talks about in this video, but more self-aware. Be able to reflect more on your relationship with reality. How to talk about anger in a specific way, specific issues with anger to talk about, how to talk about it in a certain way. That's what we work on here. So, when your car has a lot of acceleration, when your Countach has a lot of acceleration, you don't always wrap it around a tree.